Christopher, I've been waiting for the opportunity to showcase you, like for our whole audience to see, and I'm just like, it's not ready, it's not ready, it's not ready. And the universe just kind of put you here, and I'm so excited that we get to present what you do and who you are about. So let's start it off. Let's talk about the couture of music.
Yeah, so the idea of couture of music, this came from my wife. She spent a lot of years, about maybe 10 years, living in LA, working for a bunch of big fashion brands, and so there's a lot of crossover in regards to how you think about, say, wine, or you think about fashion, how you think about jazz music, and so that's essentially, to make a long story short, that's kind of how those two things came together. Because it's funny, I would say couture fashion is probably most analogous to avant-garde jazz music. So I used to wonder back in the day, like, who the hell wears that crap going down the stinking runway, right? Like someone with a I don't know, an ostrich hanging out there off the side of their shoulder or something like that, right? But she explained to me, like, that's not the function of that. The function of that is for people who are super creative to be able to go out and really express to their fullest capacity what creativity looks like, right? And then us, right, sitting on in those chairs along the runway, you might work for Target, you might work for Neiman Marcus, you might work for whoever, and you go, oh, that's cool, this stitch that's here, or this one zipper or something like that. The next thing you know, for the next 2 seasons, you see that zipper, that stitch on everything. So the whole idea is you let creative people be as creative as they could possibly become, and then you dial it down from there, right? And so with a lot of jazz music, a lot of people feel intimidated by it because there's a lot of moving parts to it. And as much as I like the avant-garde stuff for that doesn't really satiate me because I don't see how that really connects too well with a large populace of people. And I like to be able to, like always, I told someone earlier tonight, I said, music is what brings us together, but it's this conversation we're having right now that actually keeps us coming back time and time again. And so I like to be able to take that one zipper, that one little stitch of music, and be able to apply it into something that could be potentially finger popping, whether it be in 4/4, 3/4, and 7, or an 11 or 13, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. So you play the saxophone. I've known you on the drums, and I have to say, like, the rhythms you hold are incredible, impeccable, perfection. It's so nice. You're translating so much emotion through the drums. And as we talk about the couture, when we talk about refinement, I think that's what explains your music the best. And
that makes sense.
In a lot of ways. And what I love about you is not only do you perform, but you have this holistic view of what music brings to our community. Can we talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So you can't pour from an empty cup, right? So really what it boils down to is success. Like, even if you look at, like, say, like a business, like a successful business is a result of duplication, right? So like the McDonald's brothers, when they came out, they were great, but they weren't duplicatable at that point until Ray Kroc came along and he was able to franchise that out. So what I teach people through music is what I had to teach myself. And I go, if it's good enough for me, it's probably good enough for you. And so I find that when you get to the upper levels of anything, you pretty much become a philosopher. Even if you look at a guy like, say, Warren Buffett, you listen to any interview of him, he's not talking about a bunch of numbers left and right. He's talking about life perspective stuff. He's saying, I'm as successful as I am because I have a high level of emotional stability, right? Him talking, or you read anything of his, looks like a self-help book. And so when you talk to Michael Jordan versus Miles Davis, they're literally having the same conversation, just that when one says basketball, one says music. And so the thing that brings you to something is oftentimes really the thing that keeps you coming to it. Like, I started training Wing Chun Kung Fu back in 2002, and I remember my Sifu said, oftentimes what happens is that when people come to martial arts, they come to it because they either want to learn how to fight or they want to learn how to stop fighting, but that ends up not being the thing that keeps them there. They end up realizing that there's other trace minerals, if you will, that they've gotten through having a tactile experience with fighting. that you realize, man, I can take a lot of these success principles and apply them in all 5 walks of my life.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
5 walks of
Yeah,
life.
yeah.
You shared that with me earlier today
Yeah.
in our conversation.
Yeah. So one of the things I said to Chris earlier today, it's like if you don't have an adequate amount of blood circulating through all the major organs of your body, then your body starts to shut down, correct? So I was curious to see what this looks like in our day-to-day life, socially speaking. And so I say that there's spiritual, there's physical, there's emotional, there's financial, and relational, social, right? And so, for example, like if you have an inadequate amount of money, that affects all other qualities of your life, right? Like you feel a certain kind of way about yourself. If you're sick, that also affects the nature of the quality of all of our interactions. And so, as you can kind of see, I tend to think about things in sort of like large matrices, but I like to try to pare them down to something that's easy enough for you to understand. And so this 5 walks of life thing has been really, really interesting for me to really kind of unpack. Keep in mind, I didn't come up with it myself. I had a couple friends kind of help me out, sort of spell it out so I can kind of get a better sense of where I'm at on this whole timeline, if you will, because you can't move forward if you haven't defined the space that you're in, right? Like, if I want to move from here to here, I have to define the space that I am, which says this is concrete. So I have to elicit my leg muscles to get from here to here. If we're in a body of water, I have to do a completely different technique. It could be awfully weird if I walk towards you right now doing this. You're like, why are you doing that? You're weird, right?
This is very true.
Right? And so I think that the thing that keeps a lot of us from being able to move forward in regards to developing a degree of high-level mastery for whatever it is that we're interested in doing, because we haven't defined the space that we're in, right? Again, I can't move forward unless I define whatever this is.
Yeah.
And so this little matrix helps me to kind of go, well, where am I on this sort of this plot, this matrix? And from there, I go, do I have the resources within me already to be able to execute? Or if I don't, then who do I have to ask for help? It's that simple, right? Oftentimes we tend to complicate things because we don't know who to ask for help, or we're not sure if we have the necessary resources to actually move forward. So you go, here's where I am, here's where I want to be, here's the space in between. Do I have what it takes to get from here to here? If so, great. If not, who do I have to ask for help?
I've got to tell the audience at home that you could rewind that and play that on slow, repeat over and over. I love the advice you give. You have such a tangible, it's almost as though like the rhythms you keep on the drums are metaphorical for the rhythms you keep in life.
Yeah, and there's, so I've gotten to, okay, so here's the big thing when it comes to us artists. We tend to talk ourselves into holes because of the things that we hear. Like people say things, you go, oh, that sounds real good, and you keep repeating it. But we don't necessarily inspect what we inspect from that script. Like I always say that we're all characters in our own story. Mm-hmm. So how we're acting is based upon the script that we're reading. So the question you have to ask yourself, how much of that script did you author, and how much of it did somebody else author? Probably your mother, your father, your teacher, whoever the case may be. And so one of the scripts that's been given to a lot of us jazz musicians is you have to find your own voice, right? So the goal is to find your own voice. Why is that the goal, right? I remember I had a long conversation. Anyone in here know the name Wynton Marsalis? Right? So I used to spend a lot of time hanging out with Wynton at his apartment when I lived back east. So to kind of give you a quick little backstory of me, and it hopefully will maybe lend you some kind of clarity as to why I talk the way I talk, and I left here. I left here in 1995, and I joined the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps took me out east. I joined the Army back in 2011, about maybe 2 weeks prior, and I just retired last September. So while I was out there in New York, because one of my earlier duty stations happened to be in New Orleans, so Marsalis family's from New Orleans. I befriended them. I spent tons of time there at the father's house, and I got a chance to know Wynton well there. And so by the time I left the Marine Corps, of course, I moved up to New York City, or Jersey. We always say New York City. I lay down in Jersey, but I work and make a life in New York, right? And so I used to spend a lot of time there with Wynton. I remember Wynton said something to me once. He goes, nothing is about innovation. Like he's like, when I'm eating, I'm not trying to innovate anything, right? I think we get caught up in wanting to be an innovator, because when you're trying to innovate, it means you're trying to separate. Like, I need you to look at me. And so I think innovation is a problem-solving tool. Like, if I need to get from here to here and there's a wall and I can't go through it, I have to then find a way to innovate outside of the tools that I have to get over this daggone wall, right? So I'm more interested in being functional as a musician now, because I used to talk myself, play myself into corners when I would try to do something that would be stylistically me. But the problem is, if I'm the only one who understands this language, then I've already separated myself from the music. But if I'm a member of a band, my job is to help add my piece so it feels like a cohesive organism that's moving collectively, not just like a porcupine or something like that, where like everyone's kind of pointing off in different directions.
Yeah.
So here's the funny thing. I sent you that thing of KRS-One today, which is awesome, right? Where he basically says, if you're a rapper, you spitting for the corporations. If you're an MC, you spitting for your community. He's like, the ironic thing about it is that whatever you do that's great, you're going to get cash for, right? So I started going, let me focus on the bare bones of what makes great music, which is not anything stylistic. It's literally this. Always be in tune, always be in time, know how to play a song. That's it. We pay thousands of dollars to go to school to learn how to do these things, right? And so the ironic thing about that is, as I focus on those things, I'm just keeping steady time, marking the form as a drummer, I end up becoming surprised at what my body does. So, for example, the shortest distance between any 2 points, as you know, is a straight line. So when I go straight, a certain amount of information comes with that. When Bruce Lee goes straight, a whole truckload of information comes with that, right? But at the end of the day, we're thinking functional, not stylistic, functional. Go straight. Anyone can understand this concept, right? And so when it comes to music, I'm not trying to be a stylist. I'm trying to do something that's functional. And what happens is that it occurs to me that what happens on the other side is that it's something that you're going to say, oh, that's Chris. Like, I remember doing a gig here, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago, and a guy goes, oh, man, what you're playing was so innovative, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, everyone's doing this in New York. It's just new to you, right? So I'm not concerned with trying to impress you where you go, this is the greatest drummer in the world. I'm just trying to be functional. And if it occurs to you that you heard something that was great, great. If not, at least you can't say it sucked, right? So I'm creating a perfect floor, because here's the thing. If you create a perfect floor, everything is upside, right? So this is where understanding the basics of musicianship and music work. This is where freedom comes into place. You look at daggone babies, right? Babies feel very free. They're not concerned with how you think about them. They'll do what they'll play free if they feel safe. If they don't feel safe, they don't play, right? And I want the guys in my band to always feel safe. So I have to make sure that I'm performing my basic function to allow them to make mistakes that are never really realized as a mistake. You don't ever recognize them as a mistake. We recognize them as a mistake.
Right.
You don't see it, right? It's high-level mistakes.
Well, we're talking about where technique lays the foundation for improvisation.
Yeah.
Because you are on the fly. This isn't mindless. This is, you have these basically the foundation or the structure of how to create this music. Yes. And sometimes it goes in a completely different direction because the horn's playing a piece, or you're moving as a body, almost as an organism. And I think it's really cool that you're bringing a lot of that energy back to Portland. Portland has an amazing jazz history. And what you're doing with your show at 1905 every single Wednesday is you're bringing musicians back to Portland for this rich soil. And you're curating it. You're fulfilling these things. Like, we have this wealth because of you every Wednesday at the 1905. Let's talk about your residency.
Yep. So, by show of hands, anyone remember the name Jimmy Mac's, the jazz club that was downtown in Portland? Okay, so it's funny how, they say when one door closes, another one opens, right?
Yeah.
So they shut down January 1, 2017. The owner died the following day. 2 months prior to that, the 1905 opened up. Right? And so for years, everyone kept saying, yeah, we have a jazz club in Portland, but we have a whole bunch of other spots. Going back to a business concept, right? Like, you have to stay as diverse as you possibly can. And everyone kept banking on Jimmy Mac's to be the thing that accredits us in this area as being a jazz area, which, to be honest with you, it's not that happening. It used to be, But Jimmy Max made a lot of noise, and the Portland Jazz Festival makes a lot of noise. So to the uninitiated, they think that we have a great scene, but it's not actually. And I want to help to restore it back to how I remembered it growing up as a kid. It was a very healthy, very inviting scene, which is why I play music now, because my father's a very well-known a musician. His name's Mel Brown. He was. So he was it's fun. I just found a great YouTube clip of him in 1973 in Paris with the Temptations, and it's the one video that I can clearly see my father in. And he was also Diana Ross's drummer for about exclusively from 1979 to about 1991. So if anyone remembers or ever heard about that famous Central Park gig that Diana Ross did, where it rained and whatever. So the drum set I practice is the one I was practicing on 2 hours ago. Is that same drum set. And it's funny because there's like some black electrical tape on one of the tom-toms because it got snapped off by one of those, I don't know if you have one of those, those lights that open up kind of like that.
Yeah.
So much wind, broke it off, it hit my dad's drum, snapped it off, they had to try to fix it. But anyway, long story short, that's, he spent a good like 2 decades in Motown. Motown 25, anyone remember that? Right, so that was him, he was a drummer for that. Yes, so Portland used to have an awesome jazz community, and this is a big thing I want to sort of hint on, is music is what brings us together, but it's this conversation that we're having right now. So 88, 89, I went into middle school, and I remember feeling anxious because I wasn't being authentic to myself. This is a largely white place, right? And so one half of my social scene was all white folks. The other half was my cousins and blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
So 1988, 89 is the time that hip-hop starts to become a lot more commercial. Now you start to see it in the daggone suburbs, and now the people who were my age group are getting touted in the media. And so now I'm starting to get a little bit of a juice socially because I am who I am, right? And so I'm trying to figure out, how do I navigate these really like awkward waters, because my dad, as successful as he wasn't around. He was on the road 6, 7, 8 months out of the daggone year. So I remember being in Boy Scouts one day. I'd never forget, it was about 7 o'clock at night, and I remember going, I feel anxious, and I have no idea why. And I go, oh, because I'm not being myself. Because when I'm around these people, I act this way and I talk this way. And I'm around these people, I act this way and I talk this way. Yeah. How am I supposed to be? Because I didn't have a father figure that I could look at on a day-to-day basis to know how to become a man. Right. So as a result, I remember I remember thinking I have to find an exit strategy. Jazz music popped up at that exact time, because at that time they were making you play instruments in school. So I was like, I don't know what it is about this jazz thing my dad likes so much, but it's got to be better than what this crap is right here. Yeah. So I went down the path of jazz music. It wasn't because I had some deep longing love for it. It was just different from this.